Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Hello, my friend. Welcome back to Delingpole, the show brought to you by me, James Delingpole, with the help of my friends at Breitbart and Podcast One. I've got a lovely guest for you this week. His name is Dominic Frisby, author of two books, one on Bitcoin, on which he's probably the world's greatest expert, and another called Life After the State. The subtitle tells you all you need to know: why we don't need government. Amen, bro. Dominic is great. He writes on finance. He also, weirdly enough, is a stand-up comic. I'm not going to waste any more time because I'm totally knackered. I've just got off this 4.5-hour flight and a long ferry journey and lots of cab journeys from my winter holidays in the Canary Islands. And I ought to be feeling refreshed, but actually I am totally zonked. So enjoy the show, my friend. Enjoy the show. Welcome, friend, to Delingpole, the podcast featuring me, James Delingpole, brought to you by Podcast One and Breitbart. I'm not even going to bother recording a special intro this week's episode. I'm going to go straight in there with my special guest, whose name is Dominic Frisby. Dom, tell us who you are and why you're worth interviewing.
Well, I don't know that I am worth interviewing, but my name is Dominic Frisby. I'm 47 years old. I'm a Londoner, and I am Mr. Freelancer, and I do about 73 different jobs. But among those jobs that I do is I'm a writer, financial writer, and I'm also a stand-up comedian, and there's quite an odd mix between the two.
Are you very, very funny?
Well, I think if I was very, very funny, I would have been on the telly a lot more than I have been.
It's true. I haven't seen you once on the telly, so that means you're probably a bit of a shit comedian, yeah?
Well, I'll defend myself and say I'm pretty good for a tenner. If you're paying a tenner. If you're paying 50 quid a seat, you'll probably be disappointed.
I'll tell you what you really are good at. I haven't seen your stand-up sets, but I'm sure it is very good. You're a really good writer on financial matters. I've read two of your books, one on Bitcoin and the other called Life After the State, about the evils of big government. And it's a cracking read, and you seem to grasp the economic stuff as well.
Well, thank you very much for saying that, James, and I think you're a cracking writer too. I really do, by the way, and we should discuss writing later in the show, and we can get to the bottom of the fact that why none of us are hugely rich from our literary accomplishments. And having read those two books, you've actually read my entire life's work, or certainly all the books I've written, because I've only ever written two. In fact, I wrote one when I was in my 20s, but I never got it published. And yes, and thanks for saying that about economics. I came to economics and finance when I was in about 2006, 2007, and I had quite a bit of money to invest, and I wanted to invest it. And I started reading and talking to fund managers and reading, reports about companies and all this kind of thing, and also, stuff about the economics in general. And I became incredibly frustrated by how badly people write about finance and also talk about finance. They use a language that is incomprehensible to the outsider, and I think it's almost deliberate. Now, when you're a comedian, if the audience doesn't understand what you're saying, you die. They don't laugh, and you die. So that forces the discipline of clarity onto the comedian. And there is no such discipline in the worlds of finance and economics. In fact, and also in government, it pays to obfuscate. It pays to not be entirely clear about what you mean. And as a result, all these subjects are, in my view, badly written about. And I've always made it my kind of number one thing is to, and I slavishly do this, rewrite and rewrite until I have something stated in the clearest possible way to somebody, to my mum, who has nothing to do with finance or economics.
You'd make a really bad economist, especially right now, because you haven't got the art of bullshit.
Yeah.
And also, you're too often right about stuff. I think you need to be consistently wrong. You need to look at Danny Blanchflower from the Bank of England's monetary.
Yeah, and what's his name? Andrew. I want to say Andrew Hayden. The chief economist of the Bank of England was
Andrew Haldane.
Andrew Haldane, thank you very much. I don't even know his name.
Paul Krugman.
Yeah, Krugman, another one. All these guys, they didn't see 2008 coming. I did. I had all my family's money was in gold at the time, and
How did you do after that then? You must have made
did very well. But unfortunately, I sold all our real estate. So I had no real estate. I sold it all in 2006, 2007. So, and that was the right call. But what I didn't see coming was the reaction of central banks afterwards. I didn't see 10 years of zero interest rates and all this printing money. And had I understood that better in about 2009, 2010, I would have got back into property, and I never did.
Yes, I think that's very true. That a lot of us gold buggy types we thought, did we not, that interest rates were going to go up dramatically?
Yeah. I told everyone to fix their mortgage. People still haven't forgiven me for telling them to fix their mortgage in 2007 because they were paying over the rates. But I was going, there's a financial crisis coming and nobody can see it. Fix your mortgage. Because normally what happens is interest rates go up, and I didn't see that manipulation coming, nor indeed the effects it would have.
We don't want to get too technical, but in Life After the State, you talk about really why the world is so screwed economically and politically, and it all comes down to pretty much one thing.
Money. In 1914, we came off the gold standard, and the reason we came off the gold standard was to print the money we needed to pay for World War I. If we had stayed on the gold standard, the government, it's not quite as simple as this, but it pretty much is. The government then could only have printed as much money as they had gold in their vaults. And therefore, there was not the gold to pay for that war to go on for as long as it did. And if we'd stayed on the gold standard, and Germany and France did the same thing, if we'd all stayed on the gold standard, that would have placed a restriction on what our governments were able to do. And that restriction would have meant that war really would have been over by Christmas, because there was not the gold to pay for it to go on for as long as it did. And that war led to... After the war, there was this huge need to make reparations for the damage of that war, and one thing led to another. And 1911 was the turning point, actually, just before the war, with the Lloyd George and Churchill's National Security Act, Social Security Act. But that was the point at which governments started to become responsible for things that they'd never previously been responsible for: education, welfare, all these kind of things. And government has just grown and grown and grown, even with, under Thatcher and Reagan, supposedly right-wing, small government prime ministers. The state grew massively during the 1980s, and it's grown and grown and grown. And the reason it's been able to grow is this control it has over money. If money was independent from governments would not be able... the whole large government model under which we live would not be possible if we had independent money.
Where does America fit into that?
Well, there's two things I should say. It's money and tax. The other way by which... and income tax is the biggest villain in all this. And America introduced income tax in 1913, but America only actually, it kind of came off the gold standard in the 1930s. Let me rephrase that. Until the 1930s, gold was valued at, give or take, just over $20 an ounce. But in the 1930s, I think it was 1931 or 1932, President Roosevelt confiscated all Americans' gold and gave them US dollars in exchange at a rate of $20 per ounce of gold. So it was illegal for Americans to own gold. And then, once he'd confiscated everyone's gold, 9 months later, he devalued the dollar from $20 to $35 an ounce. And so, effectively, he stole whatever that percentage is, that $15 an ounce of gold of Americans' money. And he used that money to fund the New Deal and all the other things he did in the 30s. So that was America's first kind of great act of villainy in manipulating money. And then we had Bretton Woods after World War I, and then, of course, Nixon took America finally off the gold standard in 1971. And it's, 1971, 1914, these are all kind of huge pivotal points in the evolution of the state. These are all points at which it was able to suddenly bloat and bloat and bloat. But the real turning point was 1971, and since then we've just been on what's called fiat money. The only country that's been on a gold standard was Switzerland, and it ended its ties in 1999, I think. But ever since the 70s, we've just had this bloating state.
The position that you've adopted is still considered a minority, crankish position, isn't it? Even by most mainstream conservative commentators.
Sure. If I sat in a government policy meeting and started urging everyone to return to the gold standard, I'd be laughed out of the room.
Yeah. But you're right.
Yes and no. It probably isn't right for the modern age. Gold. I mean, I love gold and I love the idea of it, but the modern world could work with a gold-backed system of money, but it would involve such huge disruption. I don't think it's ever likely to happen.
The answer I thought you were going to give me when I said there's a simple reason why this is happening. I mean, money is a good one, but what I thought you were going to say was governments are spending more than they can afford, which amounts to the same thing.
It does, but they are more able to run up deficits when they control the printing presses than they are under a gold standard. In fact, in the 19th century, for all the pounds issued, the average was about 25% of pounds issued were backed by gold. So we think we were on a gold standard, but actually it was only about 25% in real terms.
But are you asking us to believe that before 1913, did you say?
Yeah.
It was a golden era when everything...
well, the 19th century was pretty golden.
Yeah, interesting. It's not
at the level by the standards of the times. The 19th century saw the fastest wage growth in all recorded history, and you saw millions and millions of people go from being rural peasants to part of an educated middle class within a generation. It was an incredible time of progress and prosperity, and sure there was vast amounts of poverty and everything else, but these were all addressed. We saw the emergence of things like the friendly societies, we saw education, and by the way, literacy rates have barely improved since the Forster Act of 1870, which made state education compulsory.
Up to the age of 13.
Yeah. And literacy rates are barely better now, and so... of course there was huge poverty in the 19th century, the like of which there isn't now, but we didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have all these things that we have now. But, if there was the same... If you look at the progress the internet has made in the, last 20 years, whatever it is, technology, one of the reasons that it's made such incredible progress is that regulators haven't understood the internet, and the innovators have been so far ahead of regulators that it's basically been a free-for-all. It's been like the Wild West, and all these things have been invented before regulators can keep up.
So you're the person who invented that, because I've been quoting this. I've been pointing out that the reason that Silicon Valley was able to get so rich is it grew faster than America's ability to regulate it.
Yeah, sure.
So all these liberals, these ghastly liberals like Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and whoever, who are now trying to impose their liberal values on the world, actually benefit from the kind of economic climate which they are not advocating themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Have you read, this is about the third time I think I've recommended it on this show, Robert Tombs's The History of the English?
No. Okay.
It ties in with what
Who's Robert Toombs?
Robert Toombs. He's a professor of French literature at Cambridge.
Okay.
But he's written the definitive account of the English people.
I'd love to read that.
It's very, very good. Particularly interesting because he is sound. He's one of us. He's like Andrew Roberts. He's like Niall Ferguson now, as opposed to that dodgy period where he briefly became a Remainer.
Well, he had a TV series on the BBC, didn't he?
Yeah. But the point he makes, which is rather germane to your argument about the Victorian era, is that the reason we think about Victorians as grinding poverty, dark satanic mills... Dickens was partly it, but also there was a generation of historians which recast that whole period as one of misery and pollution, etc., and completely
but
did
they
down
dealt
the
with
benefits.
it. They recognised the terrible poverty. People like Dickens saw all the slums and they addressed it. Hence we saw sewers built in London. We saw like I say, the friendly societies which dealt with education, and we saw the rise of the suffragettes. All these things didn't happen because of the state. They happened because people looked around, and suddenly, there was a new, rich, educated gentry, and they had money to spare, and they could afford to be humane. That's the big thing that people don't understand. I'm not saying that rich people are better than poor people, not for a second, but rich people can afford to be better than poor people. You know, people think slavery was... The reason that slavery ended is because machine technology made people so rich and it was so productive that people could afford not to use slaves anymore. And so this campaign to end slavery and improve standards grew, and it's all as a result of progress. And the richer we are, the richer everyone is.
The same certainly applies to the environment. The environmental Kuznets curve says that I think a nation's GDP per capita needs to be above $11,000 before people can afford to care about the environment.
Conservation
and the reason that Sir Joseph Bazalgette was able to build the London Embankment and improve London sanitation was because a moneyed class was available to raise the subscriptions needed for this public enterprise. So I agree with you. I think a lot of people listening to the show will agree with you. But there are at least half the world, and we're talking about the Krugmans, and we're talking about, well, the Polly Toynbees and the Guardian, the New York Times. There's a whole battery of commentators who are telling us that no, only government can free us from injustice and unfairness. Only government can pretty much create wealth. What's your answer to that?
Well, I think it's all absolute hogwash, but these guys have had the power. You know, the left-wing Liberal have had the power for, however long you care to mention, and that changed in 2016. It swung, and suddenly you've got Trump, and you've got... the jury's still out as far as Theresa May is concerned in my head, but
I'm already putting on my death cap, I'm afraid, on that one.
Oh, you think...
Black cap, yeah.
Okay, probably. But I mean, she's an authoritarian. She's a control freak. But
Yes, she believes in the power of the state to make things better.
Yeah.
She believes that government can pick winners.
Okay. But nevertheless, there's been a definite change in momentum in 2016. But change doesn't happen overnight. People think the world changed with Brexit. But, Brexit, the people voted Brexit because of 20 years of... that vote was the result of 20 years of dissatisfaction. Trump was elected because of people were so hacked off with what happened under Clinton and then Bush and then Obama. All those things that happened in
previous Bush, two Bush.
Yeah, two Bush. All those people. I'm talking about 20 years of shit.
Yes.
Was what led to Trump being elected. And those guys need to, if they've got a problem with Trump, they need to accept the responsibility that they got stuff wrong. Change is incremental. It happens gradually. And people will look back as it happened overnight, but it didn't. 2016 was a 20-year process. But anyway, to come back to the question is, there is a war of attrition going on between, I don't see it as between left and right, I see it as authoritarian versus libertarian, or you've got that square, square, yeah. So it's, there's, and I desperately want to write a fantasy book, like a kind of Lord of the Rings kind of fantasy book that describes this huge battle that's going on in our world between all the various economic and political doctrines that are struggling. I think it would be fantastic.
We need more Dark Riders.
Yeah. Dark Riders. What's Dark Riders?
Have you not?
No.
You don't know Tolkien?
Yes.
Riders.
Yes, I didn't. I call them the the Dark. What would I call them?
Ring Wraiths.
Ring Wraiths or
They have lots of names.
Yeah.
Dark Riders is one of them.
I mean, I'm obsessed with Tolkien. I couldn't believe I didn't pick up... When you said Dark Riders, I thought it was the name of a book, you see, and that threw me off. I'm absolutely obsessed with Tolkien, but that kind of thing. And that was a metaphor for World War I and everything since, wasn't it?
Totally. I was watching The Two Towers and The Fellowship of the Ring over Christmas, and they're among the very few films that I think that stand up to repeat viewings. I never tire of watching
Particularly
those.
Fellowship. I think that was the best one of the three.
And particularly the scene that always gets me, and this can be the topic of our next section of the programme after we stop to have a beer, is that scene where Frodo says to Gandalf, essentially, why me? Why do I have to be the one who has to go and do this really shit job of taking this bloody evil ring to Mount Doom to destroy it. Why me? I'm going to all this misery. And Tolkien says, probably much as... Sorry, Gandalf says, probably echoing how Tolkien felt when he was called up to fight in the trenches, it's what you've got to do. We can only decide to do in the time we're given. You have to respond to the times you live in. I don't want to be a notorious climate skeptic. I don't want to be railing against the economic establishment. Just the fact is, I'm born into an age where we don't have Victorian classical liberalism operating. We do live in shit economic times, so I've got to do my job, and you too, I guess.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing. Let me come back to this
before the beer break.
I don't know why you've invented this beer break, because we're both sipping away on our beers as
we're having a beer break because I have to build this show into like 20-minute segments. So this was going to be a natural pause because, in case it's not obvious to listeners, Frisby has dragged me to this bar. I would normally like to be drinking tea at this time of day because it's the afternoon, but he wanted to go to this bar, and I hope the bloody noise isn't making it too sound unfriendly.
It's okay, I assure you.
Good.
Now,
what about the beer break?
You want to take the beer break now?
Yes. This is the beer break starting now. You're listening to Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, and my special guest, Dominic Frisby, brought to you by Breitbart and Podcast One.
Hey, this is Steve Bertoni, host of the Forbes Interview Podcast, launching January 17th. My first guest is Adam Carolla, comedian and king of podcasting, sharing how he turned his persona into a media empire.
I came from a world where nothing really ever worked out and no one ever got to do what they want to do, not for a living.
Download or subscribe to the Forbes Interview on iTunes now, and don't forget to give a rating and review.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
We've now had our beer break, Dominic Frisby, my special guest, and me. And Dominic has told me that he has something very important he wants to say. He knows what he wants to say next, which is great for me because it means I just have to point the mic at him.
Okay, so coming back to what we were just saying about this battle between authoritarian and libertarian. 2016 was a big year for the libertarian. We've got the internet, so the internet is... the left wing, for want of a better word, the left wing has had control for however long, 20 or 30 years, but the internet and, suddenly state broadcasters are being undermined by YouTube and podcasting and disintermediation, all this thing, and I mentioned at the beginning of the show I tried to get a book published in the 90s. I now no longer need to wait for some gatekeeper at a publisher, some bod in an office.
They're all crap anyway.
Yeah, sure, and I can...
The PR's even worse.
Exactly, but I didn't know that at the time. I don't need to wait for a guy at the BBC to commission my series. I can go and make it and put it on YouTube. I can write my book. I can put it on Amazon. It's been incredibly liberalising, and there's been this emergence of so that's broadcasting's being undermined. Education. Why do we need schools in their current form? We don't need them in the way that because we've got the internet. You can learn everything. I'm completely self-taught in everything I know about economics from the internet. Healthcare is about to be undermined. Government transport systems are being, all this health data that's going on. I've got myself a Fitbit watch here, and I'm no longer going to need a cure for cancer. I'm going to know the causes with all sorts of genetic.
What, from your Fitbit?
No, not from my Fitbit, but now with DNA testing and genetic testing and lifestyle choice and all this, people will see the signs of cancer or whatever the ailment is coming 10 or 20 years before the actual problem emerges, and it will be able to be addressed. So you will never need the operation to cure your cancer because you would have dealt with the causes long before. It's not that simple, but this kind of use of data in healthcare is going to transform healthcare as we know it, and on and on. Transport, Uber. There's this. I was reading about this new taxi service, little minivans driving around America. A combination of Lyft and Uber have designed this thing in New York, which is just going to remove the need for taxis in New York. And so all these existing ways of doing things being transformed by data and the internet and technology. And like I say, these guys are so far ahead of the regulators. The system is up and working before the regulators know what's come, and so it's incredibly it's this incredible force for liberalisation, and that is why the libertarian argument is going to win. For all the blows that people are going to have to take, the state is dying, and it's a beautiful thing. But here is the problem that I have. My editor at Money Week, John Stepek, one of the things he's always said to me is, if you want to... He talks about, sometimes I rant in my articles, and he always says, when you rant, you alienate the undecided. You confirm the biases of those who already agree with you, but you alienate the undecided. So that's always made me take on a very measured approach in everything that I've written.
Slightly gay, I have to say, sometimes.
Well, in what I write.
Well, I know when you're holding back.
Yeah, well, you know, and I am holding back. And it's because I've got this fear of alienating the undecided. And I think if you want to convince them, you need a more measured approach. So I've always been to try... And the problem with that is, it's all very well... But, you know, I sold 6,000 or 7,000 copies of Life After State. I sold 9,000 copies of Bitcoin. And the first thing you said to me when we met before the interview started is, I can't understand why you haven't sold more books, because they're excellent. Well, here's the thing. You go out and you call a spade, and you go too far in the opposite direction in your provocation. And somebody like Nigel... And by the way, and you know, somebody like Nigel Farage, he's... Whether you agree with him or not, he is a consummate... has a consummate ability to express things in a pithy, clear way that normal people can understand in a short space of time. Yes. And from a broadcasting point of view, that is invaluable. And people wonder why he gets so much airtime. It's because he's great on the telly, and he's much better than anyone else. This is, whether you agree with him or not, purely from his point of view as a pundit. He's absolutely brilliant at it, and that's why they keep getting him back on Question Time, because he's provocative and he's clear and all these things. And so I'm wondering, from my own point of view, as you know, part of my life is, you know, I'm in this crusade to change the world and make it a better place, but also, you know, I want to earn a lot of money and I want to become a high-profile media person. And I'm thinking, actually, is my kind of towing the middle line attitude, do I need to just come out and get some balls like you do and call a spade a spade?
And I, of course, am completely unable to provide the answer to that. I don't know. It makes it easier to live with yourself if you're not having to censor. I mean, I
self-censor like mad.
I don't self-censor at all. I have no filter whatsoever. I never have had a filter. It's my problem. It's my curse. It means I cannot get a job. I'm never going to get given a job working for the government, even a government on my side. I'd never get put in charge of the Charities Commission or any of those cosy sinecures that you get when you achieve a certain eminence.
Yeah.
I'm never going to achieve that eminence. I'm probably never going to get to be an MP. I'm always going to be this weird maverick.
I read an article about you in The Guardian yesterday with this thing. Did you say something? Ipsos or someone came after you for something you wrote in the Spectator?
It was about ocean acidification.
Yeah.
But what interested me about that Guardian article was that it mentioned me by name in the headline. It's because I've become this thing for the Greenies.
Clickbait.
I have become this, this fiend, the bogeyman, and it's not because I'm the world's biggest expert on climate skepticism. It's just that the way I phrase my arguments against the other side, I couch it in a particularly provocative way, which really winds up the enemy, and so they're constantly trying to claim my scalp. In order to, because if they get me, it means the hated symbol of climate denialism is defeated.
You know, let me tell you what happened. Remember the Virgin Podcast? You came on and did an interview in the Virgin Podcast, and I used to host this thing called the Virgin Podcast, and it was a nice podcast. And we interviewed a range of interesting, thought-provoking people about business, tech, social issues, various things. And we'd had these two climate change guys on, an Australian called Tim Flannery and this other guy called Jeremy Leggett.
Oh, yeah,
and they
both terrible.
And they both put forward these arguments about climate change. And those shows didn't rank very well. Didn't get many listeners compared to the other shows. But the podcast was going very well. And I interviewed you because I said, let's get the other side of the argument.
Yeah.
And it was ages. They were, because Richard Branson's a big climate change advocate and he believes all that. They didn't want to run your interview for quite a long time. And I said, look, it's a good interview, and he talks about drug legalisation. That's a thing that he does agree with Richard, and we should run the interview. And eventually I lent on them and they agreed to run your interview, and I thought it was a very good interview and the show did very well in terms of listenership. And then we got some angry climate change campaigner from Australia who then wrote this kind of complaint that Richard Branson should be giving airtime to people who deny climate change. And he wrote very nasty op-ed in The Guardian, and that got a little bit of publicity. But the damage that did was that it meant that it compromised the position of the employees at Virgin, the guy, the three guys who were working on the show, because, Richard was cross about it. Now, if that guy hadn't written that article, Richard wouldn't have minded, because he was happy. It's this podcast. He wants all different opinions to be aired. He's freedom of speech and all the rest of it. But those guys' positions were argued, and now the Virgin podcast doesn't exist anymore.
So and basically, I killed your Virgin podcast.
No, you didn't kill it, because I could have said to you, no, we're not running that show. The person that killed it was that guy that wrote that article in The Guardian.
I think he's called Graham Redfern.
Redfern.
He's a complete nobody, but
but he had a thing in The Guardian.
Because of The Guardian.
I don't think, I think Richard Branson's clever enough to not give a toss about stupid little articles in The Guardian, but it compromised, the whole thing was compromised. And, so he won. Graham Redfern won that little battle because he killed that show. Now, that was I thought that, I was very proud of that podcast. We had some excellent interviews and we had some great guests and good feedback, and it was building all the time. But I lost the confidence of the people at Virgin because of that guy. And so you're talking about, so this is what happens when, if your agenda's not the same as somebody else's, the whole thing can get undermined.
Well, at the end of the last section, you were talking about the glorious revolutionary year of 2016, when things really have changed.
Yeah.
Brexit and Donald Trump. I think.
Do you edit this, by the way, this show?
No.
Oh God, I'm wondering if I've said something I shouldn't have said.
No.
Anyway.
Well, one of my predictions for the year.
Let me make it clear.
Just in case I've said something bad,
I love doing that Virgin podcast, and I think everyone at Virgin loves doing it.
You haven't dissed Virgin at all. You haven't said anything untoward. You've simply made a point that I think needs to be made, which is that one of my predictions for the year, and what's going to happen.
If you come out and you're too overt in your politics, which don't agree with somebody else's politics, in a media that tends to be to the left, your cause can be you can end up without a gig.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that happens like man at the BBC. They'll go, who should we choose?
This is only a one-way game, though. Only one side plays this game. Only the Liberal left plays this game. I don't believe that the right engages in censorship to the same degree. Maybe in the days when...
But it's not censorship. It's who they give the gig to, who they give the column to, who gets to present... Sure, who gets to present the TV show, who does this, who does that. There's always an agenda there, and Virgin didn't do that. I agree with Branson on some things, and I disagree with other things. But we had the podcast, and they did not do that until that guy came along and put pressure on them.
Going back to my predictions of the year, I think we're going to see a lot more of this going on. That the left-wing establishment, which is entrenched in places like the BBC, in the form of The Guardian, is going to use these guerrilla tactics to try and undermine Trump and undermine Brexit, undermine people like us.
I think they're going to try and impeach him somehow. They're going to find a way of trying to impeach him.
Oh, they'll use all sorts. The whole of the fake news meme is essentially a way of closing down news websites which are favourable to Trump, like Breitbart, obviously.
Yeah.
You can see that, for example, in the field of climate scepticism. The German government is now trying to make a law whereby you can't... They're trying to silence dissenting voices on the climate front. It's borderline Hitler's Germany, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're going to see a lot more of this in 2016. I'm going to ask you... in 2017.
Yeah, I can't comment on climate change because, as you know, I know nothing about it.
No, that's right.
But I do know that it's There's a lot of puritanical religious thinking that goes on.
I don't even want to talk about bloody climate change anyway. I heard you talk about economics and stuff and gold and sound.
But from a point of view of being a successful person in the media, because you may moan about the fact that you don't have this cushy job doing this, that and the other, being paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, but you occupy a prominent position in the media. You've got a lot of followers on Twitter. People like reading your articles.
Prominent-ish. Look, I think you're asking me what I miss about being. How have I suffered for my
Why
politics?
can't you get a column in the Telegraph?
They don't pay anymore. The Telegraph pays so shit, it's not even worth getting out of bed for.
But
really
it's
isn't.
a platform.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't you do an evening with James Delingpole or something like that?
No, I obviously, if I could make this stuff work, I'd do it.
Yeah.
But what's very interesting, going back to what you said about the gatekeepers who permit you to do broadcasting, for example.
Yeah.
We've got a virtual state monopoly on broadcasting in this country. Look at your field, comedy, one of your fields. Almost every comedian successfully operating in Britain and in the US is a card-carrying liberal leftist.
Those that wear their politics, those that are overt about their politics, certainly.
Yeah.
There's quite a few libertarian comedians, but they just keep their mouth shut about their politics because they know they'll be. It doesn't get them anywhere. And actually, and it's not just comedy. It's comedy audiences are like in the lead up to the Brexit vote. If you go into like a normal, when I did a talk on some financial subject, and I'd get that audience to raise their hands if they were in favour of Leave or Remain, the majority would be Leave. You go and do a comedy club, it's not just the majority, it's like 95%. If you go, give me a cheer if you're in favour of Remain, 95%, yeah. Give me a cheer if you're in favour of Leave. The one person in the room who's in favour of Leave doesn't even have the courage to go, hooray.
Yeah, of course he doesn't.
And you get, if you utter... you make a kind of libertarian argument in a comedy club, you will get, you'll get into an argument with somebody in the audience and the gig will be ruined. And then you won't get booked again. Whereas if you just come on stage and go, George Bush is an idiot, or whatever, you get a round of applause.
Can I just tell you my Bring Me the Horizon story at Glastonbury? So I went to Glastonbury the day after the result, the day of the result. The day it had been. I woke up in the morning at about 5:30 because I was all getting up bright and early to get to Glasgow, and I heard this extraordinary news that against the odds we'd won Brexit.
Did you not stay up all night that night?
No, because I had to get up early to go to Glastonbury, and also bloody Nigel Farage had gone and said that we'd lost. Do you remember? About 11 o'clock or midnight.
Why did you say that?
Nerves, I don't know.
Did he really think we lost?
Well, obviously he did. He went on the TV and said, "I think Remain have edged it." And I thought, well, if Nigel Farage thinks that, we can't have won.
What time was that?
About half 11.
No.
Yes, totally.
As soon as the first vote came in, Gibraltar was the first one. But as soon as that first vote came in, Newcastle, it was clear that it was going. That it was another surprise coming.
I'm talking about actual facts here. Okay. Farage did say this on TV.
Okay,
it's a matter of record.
Yeah, no, I believe that.
Probably
but the question, what I was questioning was that it happened at 11:30. Anyway, that night's etched in my mind.
So I go down to Glastonbury, and the next day I'm watching this band that I rather like called Bring Me the Horizon, who are kind of anthemic, kind of rock with attitude, and the singer says to the audience at one point, he says, "Hands up heels, happy about the result." And I was the only person in the crowd who put my hand up, and I thought, fuck you people. You.
Was he happy, the singer?
Interestingly, he's called Ollie something, and he's made a fortune out of the fashion industry. He's a millionaire.
Okay.
I think he's probably, being a pop star, he has to be careful what he says. So I think he declared sympathies for Remain at one point. I know this because I wrote a piece for the FT about pop stars and their politics. And when I suggested that he might have been a leaver, the fact checkers said no. We've seen interviews where blah blah blah. Anyway. We're disappearing down a
I don't know why comedy and comedy audiences are so left-wing, because comedy the life of a stand-up comedian is the single most libertarian experience you can possibly have. It doesn't matter if you went to a posh school, it doesn't matter how well connected you are, it doesn't matter if you're disabled, if you're black, if you're white, if you're male, if you're female, gay, straight, none of that matters. The only thing that matters when you walk on that stage is if you make the audience laugh. In fact, it is an advantage to have something, in inverted commas, wrong with you, because that gives you something to talk about. It is an advantage to have a regional accent or some kind of quirk or a wooden leg or a stutter. It is an advantage to be wrong in some kind of way. If you are like a bland, like straight white male, the kind of guy who'd get... But Michael McIntyre is brilliant, but he has got an edge because he's got this weird kind of duality where... He's kind of camp. His father wrote all Kenny Everett's material. So he comes from an entertainment culture. His mother was like Kenny Everett's kind of... best friend, if you like. Right. But his father died when he was very young. His mother had an affair with their builder. He had this weird upbringing where he went to public school, but then they ran out of money when he was 13 or 14 years old, so he had to go to state school. And it's why he's entirely comfortable being a public schoolboy, but talking to working class people. Man, you know, he had a rocky childhood. He might come across as this kind of smooth talking public schoolboy, but his back, you know, he's got an edge. And in terms of doing your 10,000 hours, he did his 10,000 hours, and Michael McIntyre was nobody for years, and you know, he did his time and he worked hard, but different people make it for different reasons. And you know, the other thing is Michael McIntyre I think he's a fantastic comedian, but he's not liked among
among the comics. No, I agree. No, he's very, very good.
And he's disliked. You know, a lot of comics love Sean Locke. Sean Locke is a comedian's comedian.
And he's funny as well.
Yeah, Sean Locke's a fantastic comedian, but he's loved. And Sean's another one who was nowhere for 15, 20 years. But you know, other comics don't like Michael McIntyre because of the way he is in the dressing room, and he succeeded despite that.
Right.
But it's you're on your own, you're on the road, and you are out for yourself. When you go on the bill, it is in your own interests. It is a selfish business. But if you go around being a selfish person and you overrun and you do things to upset the other acts, or you're too aggressive or whatever, you won't get booked by the club again. And so that, in fact, despite the fact that there's no subsidy until you get onto the telly, there's no subsidy in live comedy. And as soon as you start getting subsidy, it's the only live art form that survives without subsidy. And you know, and the reason it survives on its own 2 feet, and that's why it's become such a strong medium in the last 20 or 30 years, because there's no government intervention of any kind. Now, if you started coming along and started imposing on comedy clubs that, you know, comedians should only talk about certain subjects, or there should be a certain type of comedian on every bill, and all these things that you get in, you know, it would, you know, you'd leave that to the judgment of the guy who's putting the bill on, and if his comedy club puts on bills that work, if he puts too much of the same stuff, the comedy club will die. If he puts on good varied bills that audiences want to see, it will thrive. The whole thing is deeply, it's a cash business. It's so libertarian on so many different levels, and yet it pays. And comedy is individualistic. It is about you. But in order to succeed, I have to provide you, the audience, with laughs. And if you, the audience, it's a contract. And you, the audience, benefit from my jokes, and you laugh, and I benefit from your laughter, in that I get booked by that club again, and hopefully I get booked in a better place on the bill, and eventually I have my own show. And it's such a totally libertarian existence on so many different levels. And then what happens on the telly will go, oh, we need more women on this panel show, or we need more whatever else it is on this panel show. And they'll get people on the panel show who are not ready to be on this. They'll have women on the panel show who've only been on the...
Funny.
It's not that they're not funny, and we'll address that one in a minute. They'll have women who have not got the same levels of experience in the comedy clubs that the blokes have. And so the blokes are just, for the stage they're at, they're just better. So they come across as more funny, and it's but it's just because a lot of women get promoted on TV before they're ready. Now, Catherine Tate, for a long time, was the funniest person on TV. Miranda Hart, some people don't like her, some people do, but Miranda Hart, for a long time, was one of the funniest people on TV. Jo Brand is brilliantly funny. Now, all these people...
Amy Schumer?
I don't really know Amy Schumer.
She talks about her vagina a lot.
Okay, well, whatever. But the point, if there's an audience for it, let her talk about it. That's it's not my cup of tea, but if there's an audience for it, let her do it. But the point is, the idea that women aren't funny is nonsense. But Catherine and Miranda, neither of them were ever very good stand-ups. They're both brilliant comedy actresses, but they were never very good stand-ups. And Catherine will be the first to admit that. I shared a house with Catherine Tate in Edinburgh one year. And so stand-up, it's a bit like, for some reason dancing attracts a lot of more women than it does men, and of the men that are attracted to the profession of dancing, a disproportionately high number are gay. The same goes for, costume design or makeup artistry. For some reason, the profession of stand-up, I'm talking about stand-up, not being a comedy actress or a comedy performer, I'm talking specifically about stand-up, attracts a disproportionately high number of men. And of the men that are attracted to stand-up, 19 out of every 20 new acts will be male. And of the women that are attracted to stand-up, a disproportionately high number are gay. So there is something about the male gene and stand-up that one attracts the other. That is not me saying that women can't be funny, because they patently are.
I think it is. I'm going to tweet about this, and I'm going to tweet about your sexism, because I think you deserve a shitstorm for this appalling sexism that you've been displaying there.
Oh, don't. I'm scared.
Yeah, I know. Right, that's the end of this section. Because, that was really interesting, by the way. Comedy. I wasn't expecting a spiel on stand-up. Well done.
Thank you.
You're listening to Delingpole with me, James Delingpole, and my special guest, Dominic Frisby, brought to you by Breitbart and Podcast One.
My name is Anthony Ponce, and I used to be a reporter on NBC, but I got tired of being part of traditional news media, so I quit that job and became a Lyft driver, and now I interview whatever passengers end up in my backseat. So if you want to hear the best stories that real people tell me when we're driving around the city, check out my podcast. It's called Backseat Rider on podcastone.com, the Podcast One app, and iTunes.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to Delingpole, the podcast with me, James Delingpole, brought to you by Breitbart and Podcast One, with my special guest, stand-up comic, economics commentator, writer, guy trying to make a living somehow, Dominic Frisby. Dominic, you like to think of yourself as a bit of a guru of predictions. Even though every year I read your summation of how your predictions have gone, and it tends to be about 50-50.
Well, yeah, but I make them very specific, and my track record's much better than the OMF or the IMF or the OECD or the Bank of England.
You're setting the bar really high there.
Well, listen, and mine are free. Those guys all demand huge government budgets to be paid to set up, because they all try and do it scientifically, and it just doesn't work like that.
Somebody was tweeting about that today, actually. They were saying the problem with economics, the way it's taught today, is it's all about maths and not about history.
Yeah.
And with the history element removed, they have no sense of context.
Yeah, and, is it economics a science or is it a philosophy? And in my view, it's a philosophy.
It's definitely a social science, which is definitely not a science in my
There you go.
Yeah, it's a fake thing. So your predictions for the year, go on, tell me.
Well, I wrote an article about it, and so I'm just actually getting it up here so I can remember what they were. But the Bitcoin. Well,
you are the world's expert on Bitcoin.
I wish
you are Satoshi. What's her name?
Satoshi Nakamoto. Yeah. The Bitcoin. There's two big currents going through the world at the moment, and they are enormous currents, and they are, they're. Did you know 10-year currents, 20-year, 30-year, generational currents? And the first is this battle that we've been talking about between left and right, between authoritarian and libertarian. And, the left, 2016 will be looked back as a pivotal year in all that. It's the tide is changing. But it's incremental and it's not going to happen overnight. But libertarian will win. And the second big current, and it's related, is this disruption of existing ways of doing things by technology. Yeah. And in fact, Peter Thiel, who founded PayPal, wrote a very interesting essay, and he didn't think you could achieve political change through politics. He felt it was a waste of time, and the way to achieve political change is through technology, and through technology being better and cheaper at doing the things that the government currently does. And so technology is how you achieve political change. And so this big theme of disruption, and the big one that's coming is driverless cars. I just think driverless cars, it's just fantastic.
Why? Do you not like driving?
I love driving.
So it's going to be all our fun ruined?
Be even more fun having a computer drive for you in London with traffic and all that. You're talking as a rural...
It'll go really slowly.
Oh, no.
Cars will go really slowly.
No, okay. Let me rephrase that. Driving in cities is a nightmare, and I hate it. Unless I've got the roof down on a sunny day and I'm driving up and down Dean Street looking for girls. The driving in the countryside is a different thing. They're two different things. But driverless cars in the city, it's coming and it's fantastic. It's not going to mean you're never going to drive again, but it's going to mean if you don't want to drive, you don't have to. You can just sit and read a book.
Okay, fair enough.
And if you're doing the same miserable drive,
so that's your prediction of the year. Driverless cars.
No.
I could have done that one.
That's not my prediction. It's just one example of the many technological changes that are coming, and robots. What's interesting, by the way, about the whole repatriation of work from China back to the West, you know, this big argument that the factories in China... Reshoring. Is that the work's not being done by Western people, it is being done by Western robots.
Oh. So it's like Westworld.
A little bit. And you know, one of the big belts for robots I was hearing is between Birmingham and Manchester.
Robot belt?
Yeah, it's a kind of robot belt, and there's lots of niche factories starting up in that kind of corridor.
How do we make money out of this? How do we get exposed to this?
Well, you buy some robot company, I don't really know. They're also overvalued at the moment because they're all based on future earnings and nothing's making a profit.
So don't invest in robot companies.
Well, it's anyway, my predictions, Bitcoin... I think in the first quarter of this year, and we're already seeing it, gold was hated. There was a big article in the FT, For Whom the Bell Tolls, talking about gold, and there was another one, The End of a Golden Era, in Barron's. Everyone hates gold, and also bonds. Everyone said that there's been a 35-year bull market in government bonds, US government bonds, and everyone said the bull market in bonds is over with Trump, and stocks have had this huge rally. So the first thing I think we're going to see this year, and we're already starting to see it, stocks will sell off a bit, gold will rally, bonds will rally, because it's a contrarian trade. When you get that kind of level of headlines, it normally means it's a good idea to take the opposite side. And that's because narratives, every bull market or every bear market needs a narrative, it needs a story. And narratives take time to develop. And by the time you've got a really coherent, well-argued, persuadable narrative, that usually means the bull market is fairly mature. Does that make sense? When there's no good reason for something to happen, often that's a reason in itself.
Right.
Anyway, so that's one thing that I think we're going to see. Bitcoin, I think sometime this year it's going to break out to new highs, and a Bitcoin is currently about $900. It's sold off a lot in the last couple of days, but a Bitcoin is about $900 for one coin. An ounce of gold is about $1,150, maybe $1,200. I think one Bitcoin at some stage in 2017 will be worth more than an ounce of gold.
Really?
Yeah.
And is that a fair valuation?
I don't know.
You don't care?
I don't care. Yeah, what's fair, you know.
How many Bitcoins have you got?
No, I don't. I had loads stolen off me. I got hacked a couple of years ago and I had loads stolen off me. Yeah. And I've got a few, and I was late. I've got a real problem, mine. Unless I get in right at the very bottom and I'm the genius, I find it very hard to buy into something unless I get in close to the bottom. And I knew about Bitcoins very early, but I was actually getting divorced at the time, and there was only so much information I could do in my head, so I didn't buy in. And then I saw how amazing it was, and I thought my kind of catch-up trade was to write a book about it instead.
Right, yes.
So I never owned as many Bitcoins as I should, even though I think it's absolutely brilliant. But I own some, and there's been a nice rally over the last couple of months, and I had a bet on with IG, and so I've made a bit of money out of it. But I'm not rich. You know, the first official Bitcoin price was published in October, I think it was 2010 it would have been, by a kind of internet monkey by the name of New Liberty Standard, and he worked out that the amount of no, it would have been 2010, maybe it was 2009, I can't remember, October 2009, and he worked out the Bitcoin price by calculating the amount of Bitcoins his computer generated divided by the amount of electricity his computer used, and he worked out there was something like 1,100 Bitcoins to $1. If you fast forward 5 years, one Bitcoin was worth $1,200. So if you'd bought the low and sold the high, which nobody did, but if you did that, you would have turned £1 into almost £2 million. It was like winning the lottery. Those guys who got in that early in that new tech won the lottery.
That's good. Okay, so
Bitcoin's going to have a good year. By the way, 95% of Bitcoin trading is in China.
is it really?
Yeah.
95%?
Something like that.
No.
It's the Chinese who determine the price. So new highs for Bitcoin. I think the FTSE's going to have an okay year. I think the FTSE will go. It's currently at about 7,100, 7,200. I think it's going to hit 8,000 this year.
What about the Dow?
I've got 22,000 as a target on the Dow. It's currently at about just below 20,000. I think 10% is reasonable this year. Uranium, that's going to have a good year. There's two uses for uranium. One is in alternative electricity, alternative power generation, and of course in nuclear warfare. And under the new American administration, I think even if the bombs aren't actually dropped, it's not unreasonable to think that some bombs will be made. So I think uranium demand is going to increase, and uranium price is currently $20 a pound, and I'm predicting it'll rise by 50% this year.
And do we buy ETFs, or do we
There
buy...
is a thing on the Canadian stock market, the Toronto Stock Exchange, under the ticker symbol U. There is a thing that you can buy, an exchange-traded fund, which tracks the uranium price. And it's just the ticker is U.TO, and that's the simplest way to do that. Or you can buy some stupid uranium miner. Cameco is the world's biggest uranium miner, again listed in Toronto and in the USA. Most uranium, there's a lot of mining companies that have big uranium deposits that they're drilling and exploring and proving up the amount of uranium that they have, but they're not actually producing uranium yet. Producing uranium is it takes about 20 years to build and permit a mine. It's an incredibly lengthy process. Brexit, is Article 50 going to be triggered? You know more about this than I do. I think it's a case of we muddle through somehow.
I think it will happen. Yeah, definitely.
I don't think she's got the balls to
say no.
To say no.
No.
Pound, I'm very bullish about the pound.
Against the dollar?
Yeah, I'm quite bullish against the dollar, but about the
euro,
dollar as well. Yeah, I mean the pound is so cheap on a relative basis. Even if you just compare what you can buy with a pound here to what you can buy with a pound in France, or a dollar or a pound in America, it's just so cheap. And it's at 122 as we speak. And the only time it's been lower than this was in 1984 during the mining crisis. That wasn't, and the other reason, the US dollar was incredibly strong in 1984, and they had to weaken it. They had a thing called the Plaza Accord in 1985 where they had to weaken it. It's so cheap, the pound. So, but if Article 50 is triggered, by the way, there's a cycle in the pound. I've identified this kind of weird 8-year cycle in the pound, where every 8 years, and it might be jiggery-pokery, and tell me if my argument is jiggery-pokery, but every 8 years, for some reason, the pound has an incredible sell-off. So we had the huge sell-off in 2016 that we know about, Brexit and all the rest of it. Go back to 2008. At the end of 2007, the pound was $2.10 to the pound. And it sell off all the way down to $1.38, sold off by like 40% or something, financial crisis, all the rest of it. .com, go back another 8 years to 2000, .com, the pound had a 30% sell-off. Go back another 8 years, 1992, Black Wednesday, George Soros, all that. Another crisis in the pound, not, the ERM, that big crisis. Go back another 8 years to 1980, from 1992, you actually have to go back 9 years to 1985. And that's when the pound nearly went to parity with the US dollar. $1.04 it was, and we had the Plaza Accord to weaken the US dollar. And then if you go back another 8 years to 1976, the pound had another 40% sell-off in 75, 76, 77. So for some reason, every 8 years we get these sell-offs, and then of course afterwards we get a rally.
Do you think that the pound is ever going to see that 220?
220, I doubt.
Yeah.
$2 is possible.
Really?
Yeah, why not? Maybe not for 5 years or something, but why not?
Well, I suppose because I've got great faith in the US economy with Donald Trump.
Sure, but he needs a weak dollar.
I see.
And, if he's going to run up deficits, he's planning tax cuts and big government infrastructure spending programs. How's he going to fund them? He's going to be running up massive deficits. He's going to be... US debt's going to increase inevitably. With China, is China still going to be buying US bonds? You might find interest rates go up in the States, and that will push the dollar lower. Or not necessarily, but a weak dollar would suit Donald Trump's plans, and you might find he finds a way of engineering it.
Right. And where are you on the great new crash that we're going to get one day, inevitably?
Well, it'll happen sooner or later. There's another one, if you're into your cycles, there's another one, you get one every in the year 7. So 2017, 2007, 2008, 1997 we had a crisis with a hedge fund called Long Term Capital Management. 87 was the great crash of 87. 77 was an awful year for the stock market. I don't believe that stuff, but if you... Because you can just find cycles and you can look back at history and arbitrarily kind of attach some kind of cycle to it. But, if these things always look obvious afterwards. If the Dow sold off 30 or 40% and went to 15,000, you'd go, of course, there's too much debt, it was overvalued, everyone was speculative mania. But at the same time, if Dow went to 25,000, you'd have gone, yeah, there's cheap money, interest rates are low. You can find a reason why both could happen.
So let's use the last few minutes for you to...
One last theme that we're going to see. I think trade wars. Trade wars is not something we've talked about. You hear talked about for a long, long time. And, Trump's obviously got his things with repatriation. What was his, was it Nissan or Toyota he said to, if you don't build your plant in America, if you build it in Mexico, I'm going to tax your cars. If you build your plant in Mexico to sell cars to the US, I'm going to tax you, Toyota. This is really, and also with China and all the accusations he's made against China and talking to Taiwan, trade wars. I think nobody wins a trade war.
No.
But I think Trump might think he can win a trade war. And then obviously in the UK, there's going to be so many trade agreements coming up for renegotiation once we leave the EU. And the EU does not want to cut us a good deal because it doesn't want to set a precedent. And also it is sulking about the fact that it leaves. It won't want to cut us a good deal. I think the theme of trade wars, I'm not saying we're going to have trade wars, but the theme of trade wars is one that's going to return. Maybe we'll call it trade tantrum, something like that.
I see, right. Now, we're going to end by you telling me how incredibly wonderful and brave I am. This is what you said on the phone when I booked this interview with you. You said...
Well, we've kind of hinted at it already. What are you worried about?
No, state it more explicitly about...
No, well, I'm going to say it. We've kind of hinted at it when we were talking about what you need to do in the media. But the amount of stuff that you have to put up with, the stuff that gets said about you, the smearing, the misrepresentation, the comments that get left at the end of your articles, the remarks that get stuff in The Guardian, when you had your thing in the Telegraph, on Twitter, and Farage gets smeared unbelievably. I've never seen anyone get smeared as much as Farage does, and he gets misrepresented, and also Trump does as well.
Yeah.
Massively misrepresented, and but you stay true to your principles, and And it takes incredible strength and thick skin to be able to do that. And I have huge admiration for you.
It's Frodo and Gandalf again, isn't it? It's
Maybe,
but
I have huge admiration for you for the fact that you're able to do that. And also, you're an excellent writer.
Ah, Dom, that's really sweet. Can I just say...
I couldn't do it. You know, I just get in I say one vaguely right-wing thing in a comedy club. I remember I was doing Andy Zaltzman's gig the night before the Brexit vote. It was me, Andrew Lawrence, and Andy Zaltzman and Stephen Grant. And I did 10 reasons I was voting to leave the EU, and I got involved in a row with somebody over, of all things, I got to reason 9 and the audience were on my side, and I got to reason 10 and it was to do with fishing rights. And I got to row with somebody over EU fishing rights. And of all things, like if there's
with a heckler?
Yeah, with a heckler.
What did you do?
Well, we just had this kind of argument about stupid argument about EU fishing rights. But you know, if there's one thing that cannot be argued with, it is that the EU has destroyed our fishing industry. Like, of all the most... Anyway, we had gotten this round, it kind of undermined the whole gig. And then Andrew Lawrence came on, and everyone was, you know... The audience, of course, was 95% left-wing, as they always are, you know, all in favour of Remain. And Andrew, who's very provocative on his Twitter feed, but came in and gave a very kind of toned-down set and didn't wind anyone up at all and just did, you know...
Why not?
I don't know if it was because...
Did he buckle it?
Maybe a little bit.
Was he not funny?
No, he's funny. He's funny. He's a good comic, Andrew. But maybe because he'd seen me get into a row and didn't want to go over... you know, sometimes you just want to get booked again. So that means having a good gig and not upsetting the apple cart.
I don't know. It may not apply in stand-up comedy, but it certainly applies on Twitter. You can never, ever show any sign of contrition, weakness,
this is something
embarrassment.
I'm learning.
You go back hard. You don't give a toss about what they're saying. They're wrong, they're stupid, you hate them.
Yeah.
You never concede an inch of ground.
Yeah. That was the one mistake that Trump... There's a really interesting interview, actually, with somebody, an advertising guy, talking about the mistakes that Hillary Clinton's, the Democrats made in the US election. And that was one point he made, this guy. Even if what you say is ridiculous, you cannot go back on it. And the one mistake Trump made was he kind of apologised a bit too much with all the locker room banter. You remember that?
Yeah, he did.
He got a bit contrite over that. But
it was off-brand.
But Andrew, I mean, you know, I like Andrew. I couldn't say the things he says on Twitter. They're just too...
They're pretty good.
They're just too...
I'm going to do him sometime.
Oh, he's good. I can introduce you if you want.
Yes, no, I'd like to.
But, you know, I don't actually agree with some of the things he says on Twitter, but I admire the bravery with which he says them. Well, I probably am a bit. But, you know, he's going... You know, he has BBC Radio series. And
Is he?
Yeah, he did have one. I don't know if it's been recommissioned.
Anymore,
maybe not.
No.
But you know, he really puts the boot into how left-wing the BBC is. And you wonder if he's risking, you know, not... You know, everyone wants a TV series on the BBC. It is the best possible platform that you can have.
I'm not going to get one.
No,
it's very sad. Dominic Frisby, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you on my show, Delingpole, brought to you by me, James Delingpole, and Breitbart and Podcast One. Thank you very much, mate.
My pleasure, James. Thank you.
Hey, it's Layla from Layla Ali Lifestyle on Podcast One. Now, as an undefeated boxing champion turned fitness and wellness expert, I'm going to be bringing you the information you want to hear on holistic wellness, parenting, fitness, cooking, relationships, and so much more. You can download new episodes of Layla Ali Lifestyle every Thursday at podcastone.com or subscribe at